Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. There's a few familiar faces and names there. This is our second edition, actually. No, it's the third edition, but the second one had to get cancelled, so it's officially the third. Um, but it's called Unnamed Layers, and it's very much a sort of a one-on-one conversation with selected guests about certain topics that we probably everybody experiences at certain points, but there isn't always a lot of insight or knowledge out there. There isn't many conversations. And it's just really just a very basic, open, honest, ended conversation. Today got Amy Gleave with us from Dawn Creative. You're in Manchester, aren't you, Amy? Or in the northwest, sorry. Um, Amy works in marketing, works as a marketer in an agency, but has various expertise in other areas and other roles in the past. And I think it was the reason why I wanted to do this today is because I've never really fully understood the role between marketing and design and what the agendas of both, if there is an agenda, or what the sort of requirements are of both. It usually ended up feeling quite stifled by marketing professionals because it's this idea that we're designers and you're more analytical and we just end up getting frustrated because this beautiful work gets sort of devalued ever so slightly, and that's always how this sort of thing rolled around in my mind and at the agencies I worked at. But I don't think it was ever based on anything other than a designer wanting to just be creative. So I think we're just going to explore different areas of this, and we'll just sort of move and flow with wherever it goes. If you've got any questions, drop them into the live chat, and we can get those answered too. As I say, I mean, just throw it over to you just for a very quick intro, just about about yourself, just so we can have a little bit of a background, and then we can just get going if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So, hi everyone. I'm Amy. I'm the digital marketing manager at Dawn Creative. We're based in Cheadle, which is South Manchester, and I probably joined nearly 3 years ago now, which feels like it's flown. But yeah, I was the first ever marketing person at the agency. And so it's just quite interesting to see because I've always worked with designers, in other roles. But this one being in the design agency, it's really interesting to see sort of their side of things. Like in the past, I'd say things like, oh, this will only take 5 minutes. Can you quickly do this? And now I can see like why it doesn't take 5 minutes, and I can see the inside of the sort of system. So yeah, it's good to be on talking about sort of the relationship between design and marketing. Got um, a few good things to hopefully say in the conversation. So yeah.
Brilliant. Just quickly, what's it like working from a marketing perspective in an agency? How does that dynamic change compared to previous roles? Because were you working in a business in-house working with external suppliers from a creative perspective before? Now you're actually within that team. Is that dynamic completely different?
No, it's not completely different. So in my last role, I worked with two design agencies, but they were sort of independent creative directors that kind of run their own businesses. And the second one that I worked with, I loved working with him so much that it's actually what drew me into the design industry. And funnily enough, I actually did like a little graphic design course, and I was like, I'm not very good at this. Maybe I'll still work in the industry, but I'll just stick to marketing. Um, but yeah, in the past, it's kind of been like me as a marketer with that specific designer. In my last role, me and him would be really close and constantly, work on marketing things together. But I would do the planning and then he would do the designing. And we had a really, really good relationship. I know that's not necessarily the case with all marketers and all designers. He actually said to me once, he was like, "Oh, you're a really good person to work with because you trust everything that I say." Like, I don't know if you can tell, but this room is black here. And I'm coming to a story. So at my last company, we had this like client services room where we would invite like really posh clients, like L'Oreal, Maybelline, like Boots, really good big companies in. So we needed this room to look incredible, right? And so we had all these ideas and we got the designer on board because he was obviously a graphic designer, but his mind sort of was perfect for that sort of thing. So I said, right, this is the idea. I want it to be comfy. I want it to be coffee machine. I don't want, because it was in a warehouse, but I wanted it to be like this beautiful welcome room where people could come and co-work, and it'd be this complete transformation. So anyway, onto the black paint. He said, right, I've got an idea of how it could look, right? We want this pink sofa, and I want all the walls to be black. And my MD at the time was like, it can't be black. It'll look like Mr. Smith's. I don't know if you know it, in Warrington. And he was like, no, no, absolutely not. Like, let's go back and say no. And so I went back. I was like, Rich, uh, Paul says no. And he was like, tell Paul no. Like, tell him no to his no. And I was like, oh God. So I had to go back to the MD and be like, he said no to your no. And he was like, well, we can't just paint the entire thing black. Anyway, Paul's a brilliant MD, and he lost sleep for like 3 or 4 nights. But he was like, okay, do you know what? We trust him. He's the designer. So we painted this room black, this client services room black, and had like pink furnishings and, you know, and anyway, it turned out amazing. And so we were like, right, we just need to trust this guy, because it's so easy to be like, oh, yeah, we'll instantly dismiss that idea. But at the end of the day, the marketers have, and the MDs have ideas, and the designers have ideas, and they're both good at what they do, and you both just need to trust each other to sort of know that they're both coming from the right place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's back to that sort of original point I sort of slightly started to make it at the introduction about this feeling that maybe, from a creative perspective, marketeers, uh, it felt like they were stifling the creative because the agendas of both parties are slightly different, aren't they? So that's
Yeah,
it. From a design perspective, you want everything to be about detail and aesthetically perfect, which doesn't always equate to solving the brief necessarily or the problem. I think there's just a lack of maybe education on both sides about what the roles of each are. So,
yeah.
are there anything, or were there any in the past set sort of parameters that you had to work towards as a marketer? Was it just about getting more eyes on the product or the brand or whatever it might have been, that project? Or was it more number driven? So it's the data sort of focused thing, which creatives don't always sort of understand or contemplate when they're creating work. Were there things that were set that you had to achieve that within your role?
Yeah, kind of. So I think the big thing to know is that we're both obviously working towards the same goal, and that's just to make sure that whatever you do is effective. And I think a lot of the time the marketers know probably more than the designers how that thing will be effective. So they'll know like what success really looks like. And I think if you don't communicate that with the designers, then you've got no sort of reasoning behind your decisions. So a really good, this is kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I did a research piece maybe a year ago now. I think it was February 24. Oh yeah, so literally nearly exactly a year ago. And I asked kind of like designers and marketers what the other group should do to make that relationship easier. And some of the information that I got back was really, really interesting. So just on your point, um, there we go. So marketers have said it's really important to understand what's actually important to them. So these are quotes, like direct quotes from people in the communities that I'm in marketing. So one of them has said, we're always going to be driven by data, and that includes creative. Having a really good understanding of what makes a strong direct response message and how users across different devices consume advertising slash creative is really valuable. So sometimes, for example, it can be that creative's got a really really good idea and on how something will look. Take like intro cards, for example, on like a motion piece. So say if you've got something that you want to put out on social and you want to put it on Instagram Reels, then but the designers might be like, right, okay, let's do an intro card like we always do. Let's do the piece, and then let's do the end card at the end. So sometimes, even though the intro card would make it look so polished and give that sort of title there, and the slow gradient into the actual content, the marketer might be like, sack off the intro card, because even though that looks incredible, we know that users on this platform have to be hooked within like 1.2 seconds or something. So if you do an intro card, you've lost them already. And then same with like end cards, it might look great, but what's the likelihood somebody's going to sit there for an extra 4 seconds and watch that? So things have their place, but the designers knowing when something's fit for purpose is really, really important. And yeah, hopefully that sort of answers that in a
Yeah,
way.
it's really interesting that because I remember having a conversation with somebody we were doing a proposal for something, and they basically stripped out all of the smaller details that in hindsight they were there just for aesthetic reasons. They did nothing, but they're really small little details. But when they were taken away, it felt like the design had lost something, and it was sort of a button of heads, and there was no real solution. It ended up being a bit of a Frankenstein. It didn't win the pitch, and everybody sort of had a fight, basically. And it was it was a real sort of down moment, quite toxic. It became for quite a while, but it was because I don't think that those two parties really communicated properly or understood, and that's what I think the big problem is, isn't it? There's this void where it feels like somebody wants something, and then somebody else wants something else. It's a like a toxic relationship, isn't it? And it's sort of it just then gets more fractious as you go along because
Yeah,
you don't understand what each other's responsibilities or roles or why all this sort of stuff does or doesn't exist. That,
definitely.
have you had any instances of that where what can you do to bridge that gap? Do you think there needs to be better briefing so creative teams understand what those requirements of the market teams, because sometimes it has felt very much this is our thing and we're looking after this is guarded and we don't
Yeah.
want anybody else to know that, and that's when the problems start to arise, I think.
Yeah, and it all comes down to what is the actual goal of this piece of content or this whatever it is. It's like with branding, obviously that's what Dawn focuses on, like brand identities, brand strategy and stuff. And in the same way that we will say, everything that you do has to stem from your values, otherwise, it's not on brand. Everything that we create as marketers and designers together has to achieve a goal. And I think at the beginning of the process, if you don't establish the goals, if you don't establish what the success looks like, then there's no sort of backup. So there's no rationale for the reason. So what is the problem that they're actually solving? What are those goals, and how do we define success? Um, and I think as well, there's a lot of the time, especially now everybody's working remotely, there's the marketers and the designers, and they're kind of in their little silos. So they don't tend to come together early enough. So a good example is, for example, there was something that I put together. It was kind of like a sales campaign at Dawn. Um, it was kind of like an outbound lead generation thing. And I said, right, I really want to target construction companies and I want to do something totally different. I don't want to do emails. I don't want to do, everything that everybody else has done, but I don't know what that thing is. So I got the creatives on board, and which is great because I've basically got my own like creative agency, like just on hand whenever I need, which is amazing. But they all like got together in one of their design meetings and they were like, right, okay, this is what she wants. This is the goal, and this is what we need to get out of it. And this is why we want to be different. So they knew the entire brief. Like I did a Loom video for them. And Henry, our motion designer, well, everybody came back. They did like it was like a Figma or like a Miro board. I can't remember which one. But it was this thing with loads of ideas on it. And it was like, oh, we could do this and, send out like an actual like package of a drill or something. I can't remember what one of the ideas was. But the one that Henry came up with was high-vis jacket with the message that we were going to put, the key message like ironed onto the back of the actual high-vis. So the idea was we target construction companies and say like, could then the name of the company be more visible? And then that was like those words were mine and Dave's words, but his idea was to put the message on the back. So the way that marketing and design totally collaborated at the very, very beginning of a project, it was amazing and it worked. And we got, some really good meetings out of it with really big construction companies. And if we hadn't collaborated at the very beginning, like it would have been a shit show because it would have felt like design had just come after the strategy or the strategy had come after the design and you're trying to like shoehorn it all in. So I definitely say collaborate at the beginning of a project. I think as well, it's important to know that like if you don't have a really good sort of strategy behind a campaign, like the marketing isn't on point, then people aren't gonna understand why you want to buy something. Take like Tony's Chocolate Only, for example. Tony's Chocolate Only, all designers know it as a brand, like because it's so cool and it just looks great. And but then look at like Divine Chocolate. They've both got a really good like market position and they do very similar things like stop exploitation in the cocoa industry. But the design is what helps that message you know, get told to everybody. And also the marketing is what sort of says like this is exactly what we do. This is how we're gonna promote it to the world. We're gonna do this campaign, that campaign. But they're supported by a really, really good design team. But company like Divine, like when was the last time you saw a really good campaign from them, like marketing wise or design wise? So you can have the same proposition, but Tony's Chocolate Only is a really good example of when marketing and design collaborate at the very beginning.
Yeah, no, it really makes sense. Well, when you say it like that, it does. It's it makes it seem a lot more obvious. But I suppose that there is that thing within. I'm really coming at this from a designer's perspective, from my background. Obviously, you're seeing it from the opposite side of this conversation. But I suppose there's the idea of collaboration makes so much sort of sense, but it can be quite difficult to sort of get that sort of seamless link in the project, can't it? Because marketing might be delivered by another external team. And I've had that before. You've got a client in the middle, and then they're working with 4 or 5 different partners, and
Yeah.
then, sometimes those dots aren't joined up, are they? Here's a Word document with marketing text in it, and then that's translated by somebody else to sort of create a brief, and then that brief is sort of becomes a bit of a Frankenstein. You end up creating something that isn't really needed because nobody's sure what's needed. It all gets really messy, doesn't it? And that's why I think maybe those relationships break down. But I suppose it's up to somebody. I don't know necessarily you can pinpoint it's anybody's specific responsibility, but maybe it's up to more creatives and marketers to try and forge those relationships because it would make it a lot more harmonious, and ultimately the project is the benefits that process, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I'd say, if you're finding that the dots aren't connected, like just make it happen. So sometimes the marketers can be like, oh, well, I assume that the designers know exactly what they're doing now. And the designers can be like, oh, well, that's the brief. Like, we just got to work with it. But, as a designer, you could be like, right, listen, Amy, like, I've got this brief from you or from the marketing department. Do you mind if we set up like a 20-minute chat? Because we'll tell them how we've interpreted that brief. And then they might be like, oh, no, no, that's not at all what we mean.
Yeah.
And so don't be like, I'd say, yeah, as designers, don't be afraid to be the one that reaches out and make sure that that brief is completely, you know, thorough and you know exactly what you're both doing. Even as I say, even just an email just saying, hi, we've received the brief. This is how we've interpreted it, just to let you know and put it in your own words. Just get it like double signed off.
Yeah, yeah. I've been doing, and we set up a sort of our own sort of network page, a website called the Hive recently, and it's sort of like really just a way to escape some of the noise from traditional sort of social media and just the avalanche of stuff that you see. And through that, I've been doing a few sort of portfolio reviews and been gathering some mentors together just to help predominantly younger people, but it's not exclusive to an age range. But there seems to be a lot of younger people that are a bit lost. But going through
Yeah.
the portfolios, you see so many of the same sort of habits or mistakes or errors. But more than anything, it's just open my eyes up to how saturated the industry is in every sort of area of it. So I suppose something like going back to this conversation, something like being that person that takes charge to own, own the sort of relationship between client and suppliers and everybody within the chain. It can also turn into quite a big sort of selling point, can't it? Because it shows proactive, it shows you. sort of being a project leader more than anything, managing that from top to bottom, which is something most clients, I imagine, would be sort of in favour of.
Yeah, exactly. Dave, our MD, the founder of Dawn, has, said in the past that, when he was a junior designer and, maybe the lead designer was off or like the head of design was off, he would be the one that took charge, even if maybe he wasn't in the position to do that. But then that's what ultimately got him the promotions and got him like the bigger roles. And I think you don't need to wait until it's technically your job to do it. If nobody else is doing it and you know that it will benefit a project, then just crack on. And there's nothing. What's the worst that can happen? Someone says, "All right, pipe down, Chris. Stay in your pay grade."
I've
But
heard that a few times.
yeah, but then maybe you're in the wrong company that don't necessarily encourage progression.
Yeah. No, but I think it's also it goes a lot of ways. That doesn't it? It's sort of I've been guilty of it of just sort of getting sent something from a client and just going, yeah, this is what it will cost. I'll do it by tomorrow, and it's you sort of just get guilty of falling into that trap. But I know not everybody's maybe got the confidence to maybe take the lead. But I think more and more I'm sort of leaning towards the idea of being working in design in whatever sort of part of it you are, of this mentality of showing creativity in all sorts of ways and not just from producing an aesthetically pleasing piece of marketing,
Yeah,
whatever shape that might take. You've got to think creatively in the way that you deal with people and clients, the way that you sort of try and win work, and how you promote yourself. It can't just sort of continue to lean on this idea that you've got a nice logo and a good selection of colours
yeah,
on your website. There's got to be a lot more to what you do, and whether that's even like writing sort of engaging copy in your case studies or on your website, etc., all the way through to the way that it is marketed. I think it's never been needed more to sort of think creatively from top to bottom throughout the whole business.
definitely. And I think for designers, if you've got a little bit of knowledge of the marketing sort of process, and the same with marketers, if they've got a bit of knowledge of the design process, it makes it so much easier. So if you're creating an email design or something, um you could say to the marketer, like, right, what is the journey for this? How do they receive this email? What's the landing page that it comes from? And what does that landing page look like? Or like, okay, so from this email, if they click this link, where do they go? And you can look at the journey as a whole and be like, okay, and it will win you more work as well. So if you could maybe get a landing page design project from that. Um, and marketers, I think, especially the higher up you go in the bigger companies, they're so busy that it would be an absolute breath of fresh air to hear that from a designer. Like, okay, here's your email design. Um, if you need a series of follow-ups, if somebody does sign up to the newsletter, and you want to do like, three automated emails for the first sign-ups, let's do those too, or like let's do the landing pages. And I think that could definitely be something that, even if you just have a few extra questions around what is the actual purpose of what you're doing, rather than I'm doing this, hand it over, like job done. I think understanding that journey could be very good. And same for marketers. I know that your audience is more designers, so might be speaking into the abyss here. But as marketers, if you understand things like white space, if you understand things like balance and hierarchy in design, you're gonna your life is just gonna be so much easier, because like we've had in the past a pretty big like client. We were doing I think it was a leaflet design for them as part of like a wider piece on like this event. And I just remember Dave like having his head in his hands. This was back when he did a bit of the design when I first started, but he doesn't really do that anymore. And he was like, they've asked for like everything on this one, flyer. And if you get this through the post, are you going to even read it? And I was like, absolutely not. Like I'd be straight in the bin. And they were trying to get like 6, 7 messages in. And so the designers are like, let's put one key message on it and let's put the rest on a QR code or something and send them to a landing page or whatever. And I think those marketers clearly just didn't have any idea about white space or balance or like one key message. And if they did, then maybe there wouldn't have been such a fight. But yeah, I don't know whose responsibility that is to sort of,
Yeah.
tell the other one what's what. It's really tough.
Yeah, because
Sort of,
I don't want this conversation necessarily be bashing designers or saying that we need to do more, because obviously it's nuanced and it's two way, isn't it?
yeah,
But I think when we originally spoke about doing this call, we discussed that the idea that, say, just in this instance, what Right Aligned has created so far in terms of that insight into agency life, how if we could get that in front of marketers,
mm,
it would just give them a bit of insight themselves. So it's not just to inspire other creatives or other designers; it's to show in the industry chain that if you do, and that vice versa, if there was something like that of marketing, I'm sure there is, just to give a bit of a better understanding of the boxes they're trying to tick too. Like you say, we're all aiming for the same thing. It's just sometimes in life it can be a bit like we want our thing to be take priority. It's more
yeah.
important for it to look nice and for it to tick boxes or sort of be relevant data wise. And then marketers would say the same, wouldn't they? They need that to be the first thing that comes in the chain. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's just an ongoing thing. I suppose it's got to also be a case by case. Some people probably already do a lot of what we've discussed, and others maybe that they're new to it. So it's you sort of find your feet, and the idea of pushing back on clients and sort of taking the lead sometimes comes with age and experience, isn't it? Where you feel more confident to do that. I think the
Yeah.
idea of pushing back is really important, for both sides to not be offended by that, because you're ultimately trying to find a better solution.
Exactly. And going back to, Rich saying like, no, I'm saying no to your no. Like that hasn't happened since, like, I've not heard of anybody doing that because he ran his own agency and he was, in his 40s and he he was confident enough to do that. But I think if one of the junior designers, maybe at Dawn even, you know, said that to a client, they'd be like bricking it. And I know a lot of designers are introverts, kind of comes with the industry. So it's so much easier said than done to push back. But another interesting thing that one of the marketers said in this research piece was, let me know why things might take the time that you quote and let me in on the journey. If it's not really possible to do something, go into detail as to why not. There are things that designers know about how things work that marketers might not have a clue about and take for granted. I imagine that's why a lot of marketers think things can be a 5 minute job as they don't know what goes into it. And I think that's really important. I remember my first marketing job and with the first designer that we worked with, not the second one that pushed back. And I just remember he was getting really frustrated about something. And I was like, do you want to just go into a bit more detail then about like why you're getting so frustrated about this? And he was like, do you want to, I'll share my screen. I'll show you. It was all about like packaging things up or something. And I was like, oh, just send over this. And he was like, that'll cost you like half a day. And I was like, what? Just send it.
Yeah.
And then he was like, no, because I need to like do this and this. But he wasn't going into detail about like exporting and all of that. And I can't really remember what he said. But he showed me, he like shared his screen and he was like, this is what I have to do for each individual thing. And this is why it takes half a day. And that's why I'm going to have to charge you. And I was like, oh my God, like I had no idea. I thought it was a case of like drag and drop, send it over. So there was a clash, but there was such a lack of knowledge like from each side. He didn't know that that's what I assumed, and I didn't know that that's what it took. So I think communication and just assuming that if there's any friction, just try and explain as much as you can.
Yeah, no, I'll be honest, I've been in all of these, you're bringing back some bad memories. I've been in all of these scenarios where you go through, you just sort of take it for granted that everybody knows what everyone else is doing, and there
Yeah.
are a huge amount of technical sort of things in what we do, but I think it gets lost for making not pretty pictures, that mentality where it's all just sort of, paint by numbers sort of idea. But when you get down to the technical bones of, like setting something up a print and if you've got a big job and it's going to cost a fortune, you don't have to get nervous about, making sure that it's done correctly. But then if it needs amendments, and then, like you say, someone else asks for this and you've got someone else chasing you for that, or clients wanting things yesterday, those old cliches, you can just sort of just, gloss over it and you end up churning through it. And then I think that's when that becomes quite fractious, doesn't it? Because you just leave me to do it on my own in the corner sort of type mentality, as opposed to being a bit more transparent about it and treating everybody like, that the first time they've ever done anything sometimes can sound patronising, but I think it's good just to be really open. But again, I think that's come with age and experience. And I
Yeah,
definitely, as a younger designer, was, like I say, wouldn't have pushed back because of fear of probably, losing your job, because it's
yeah,
that hierarchy mentality, but also the idea didn't really know what worked. Combinations worked right, what fonts and colours and layouts, all these sort of things. You have to pick that up as you go along, don't you? You're not born with that information. So it's sort of,
yeah. I think what you were saying about transparency, it's difficult because as a designer, like at Dawn, when we present a brand identity, we only present um one idea, even though there might be 20 that have happened in the background. We just found that, if you present three, the marketer bloody wants a mixture of all three, and it's so annoying. And I was that person. Like I remember three concepts being presented for it was for an event stand, and it was and I remember it was literally like a pick and mix. I was like, oh yeah, I like this, and I also like this, and I like this. And I was like, just mash it all together. Like, can we have all of those? And he was like, oh, this is just so annoying because no, like they're individual things. So I think before I joined Dawn, probably went through all of that process and decided to just present one idea. But then, like the DMFA example that we did with you guys on the process event, um, sometimes you can, to that client, it kind of looks like, oh, this is the one thing that they've come up with. But then in the background, you might see like 50 iterations of something. And as the marketer, if you haven't seen even a glimpse into that, you might be like, oh, it's kind of lazy, coming up with one thing and just expecting me to like it. And but actually there's been so much that's gone on in the background. So that sort of transparency, if you can show in a little way, this is what we've done, but ignore all that because this is the thing, then maybe that could be a good way to go.
yeah, yeah. That's why I find those process workshops fascinating because, A, from a creative perspective, it gets us to see things that you don't have the privilege of seeing anyway. It's a sort of fly on the wall luxury, which is what I always wanted when I started out, but could never have unless you were hired, which is, very rare for a lot of these bigger agencies or even teams of all sorts of sizes. But what I think is really interesting about that is so many people reference. There seems to now be, because we've done a decent amount of them. There seems to be quite a lot of common threads. So there's a lot of individuality. Obviously, teams are all made up of different people, but there's some common threads such as keeping the clients involved in the journey, and things like
Mm,
that were really important because I remember when I first started out, or even actually until I sort of stopped working with clients, it was very much you took a brief, you disappeared for, if you were lucky enough to have 4, 5, 6 weeks to work on a project, you come back and it was a bit like a good dinner, and then you see faces drop because they just didn't know what to expect, and it
yeah,
was really awkward, difficult conversations because you just sort of disappeared and tried to interpret this thing on your own as opposed to keeping everybody in the loop. So that
yeah,
includes obviously founders or it could be whoever's involved in that as a client. So it could just be a general manager, it could be a founder if it's a smaller business, the stakeholders, etc. But then you've got people like marketing and you've got maybe in-house design teams too that might be needing to understand how to develop this stuff in future. So the
yeah,
idea of being transparent and and communicating is just it's one of those sort of simple things that you hear said all the time, but it's still one of the things that sort of is last to be implemented by a lot of people. So it's hopefully just um, continually talking about communicating. It
yeah,
sort of hopefully just sort of slowly seeps into people. It's such a simple thing, it's not an expensive tool or a piece of software or hardware or a specific skill you need to pick up. It's just treating people like people and
yeah,
and that's all it is, isn't it? Building relationships and hoping that everybody has respect and trust along the way.
exactly. And it sells.
Oh, I think Amy's locked out there. 1 second, guys. See if we can get Amy back. Right, I think what I'm going to have to do is end the call and see if we can reconnect to Amy. Sorry about this, everybody.
Got it. Oh, is he back? You're on mute. Did we lose you for a sec? You're on mute, Chris.
There we go. God, schoolboy errors. Yeah, no,
I
I think
think it's really concentrating on what I was saying, like
I think the
focusing.
Wi-Fi dropped off by the looks of it. Sorry about that. So, well, we're all
No,
back in.
no, no, all good. But yeah, so this concept behind the shoe brand was like raise up, and then it incorporated itself into the A's in the logo, and it had like the heel as the A. Um, and when you sort of saw the logo and you saw the brand identity, you were like, wow, yeah, it's beautiful. It's definitely high end. You know, you've really aligned with our new brand positioning and all of this. But if you didn't know the sort of story behind it, and if the designers hadn't gone into all of that detail and said, this is exactly why we've chosen this, this is exactly why we've chosen this copy, this is why we've done this, um, they just wouldn't have bought the dream anywhere near as much. So having that backstory and having like it all comes down to again the transparency. It's not just like brand storytelling, but it is transparency on the process and how you've got to a certain point.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose the industry moves on as well, it becomes more and more important, doesn't it, to be able to sort of open up the way that you work and all those sort of things. You know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was a completely different sort of landscape. So I think
Yeah.
it's really beneficial to everybody. Chantal and Pierce have just dropped a couple of comments in there about agreeing about the communication, and Pierce has just mentioned about the just only one concept. Um, yeah, I agree. I think it's what you're saying, Amy, is about sort of that Frankenstein idea, isn't it? Gluing different bits and pieces together that shouldn't really work, but you
Yeah.
get excited by seeing all the ideas, and it's hard to sort of choose one. Um,
No. Exactly.
I think it'd be interesting just to, because the time is flying by, it always does on these things, is to start to have a look at a little bit like your role at Dawn and the sort
Yeah.
of we've sort of touched upon. I mean, there's so much. These sessions could be like 2, 3 hours long, really. If you just imagine you sat in a pub just nattering away about something, but trying to condense it into a shortish period of time is quite difficult. So we sort of touched upon like more about the relationship between design and marketing, or marketers and designers. I'm more interested about one of the reasons why getting you on is because from what I've seen, obviously connected with the team at Dawn, you guys have all been very supportive of what we do, but it's allowed me to then sort of see into your world. And I don't think when I was working as a designer, I was really looking at other agencies, as much as I do today, because now sort of, my focus is pretty much solely on trying to find people to collaborate and work with us to create ideas and content. But it allows me to now see the amount that you guys produce from a perspective of marketing the agency, but doing it in a way that seems to be really positive to inform people about what you do and what goes into it. Things like your brand building, and I saw something. I think it was today or yesterday about the motion guidelines that you do,
Yeah.
and you're releasing something coming up soon, or offering something to clients. So has your role? Do you find it has changed completely now? You're working in an agency and you're sort of trying to market that agency to clients. Has it changed from working with designers to to complete a project for a business?
No, I'd say it's exactly the same, but it's just great having the people sat next to you. Because at the end of the day, my job, it doesn't matter what I'm promoting and what I'm marketing. My job is to make sure everyone knows about that thing and everything in it. And it just happens that I'm telling everybody about the things that a design agency, design brand, digital agency does, and trying to find really good ways to showcase that. And having the design team like on hand is incredible. But as you were saying about like the digital brand guidelines thing, and there's another one that I was actually going to post yesterday, but I will post today, around like when you build a website in WordPress and you can do it component based. So like you can drag and drop components. And honestly, when I joined on and I saw how like Craig and Wayne build the websites, I was like, this is a game changer, like how marketers usually have to go back to like web developers and ask for a little change here and there. I've never been able to use a website like this in the back end. But to them, it's just their day to day. They're like, oh, what do you mean? It's just the components that we use. And I'm like, we need to shout about that. We need to like tell other marketers, because that's essentially who we're marketing to, marketers. We
Yeah.
need to tell the marketers how easy it is when you have your website built with Dawn, and the little nuances and stuff. Because to Craig, that's just his bread and butter. And I was like, let's do a video on it, and then Henry can be like, right, okay, these are the things that are important to include in the video. And so now he's made it yesterday, and it's honestly so good. But I think designers have a tendency to just show off the work. And it's like, oh, this is the polished product. This is the beautiful like brand that we've done or whatever. Not show like this is how we as an agency can really help you in your job, in your day to day. So yeah, being able to sort of tell them what other marketers might find really important, like the digital brand guidelines, having everything in one place, like being able to send a link to somebody in Japan. I mean, hopefully they speak English, but being able to send something across the world and not send a PDF and be like, oh, this is version 6, I'll send version 7 in 6 months' time. Like seeing the benefit of some of the stuff that you do is basically a big part of my job. Um, and hopefully I've brought something a bit different to just sharing the finished product. I hope that makes sense and I hope that
Yeah,
answered the question.
yeah. Well, I think that the question was quite convoluted anyway. To be honest, I probably bamboozled you a little bit with asking it, but it makes perfect sense. I was thinking more like you maybe had to sort of change mentality, but I suppose really in theory it doesn't matter what role you step into. You're still trying to create the same sort of results, aren't you? Um, I think. Do you have a sort of long term strategy with what you're doing with Dawn? What I'm trying to, I'm thinking more. I know from first hand how difficult it is to sort of try to even grasp how to promote yourself and market yourself. We all have this. Well, as say we all as designers have this terrible habit of being able to work with clients, but we try and use those processes yourself to sort of structure your own identity and sort of have a vision for how you're going to win more work or what the business will look like moving forward. It's a really difficult thing to do. It's so hard to put that hat on for yourself and sort of treat yourself as a client. So,
Yeah.
what are the sort of approach that you guys using at Dawn? Is it a strategy in terms of this is a sort of step by step over a year or longer or shorter? Is it looking at certain products and things that you offer, like the guidelines, so it's all sort of product and sales driven, or is it just a sort of culmination of just different ideas that you sort of float around and come up with dependent on what the time of the year it is or what needs to be done in terms of generating revenue, etc.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think if you were talking to a more organized person, you'd get a much better answer. But I think I feel like still relatively new to, marketing and I'm probably the least organized person I know. So the way we sort of do it is we do have a bit of a plan in terms of like, we'll do a webinar once every 2 months, we'll do a podcast once every 2 months, we'll do internal developments as and when we can, like things like our pitch deck. Like I will say to the design team, like, right, we're changing it completely. We're changing how we structure pitches, and this is what the brief is to you. So, and then we do a kind of dawn day. So balancing the client work with Dawn's work at the beginning was a bit of a struggle because I was like, oh, I need this, and they're like, well, we have 10 clients waiting on things and we can't just do that for us. And I was like, but we are a client as well. Like I am your client, like for Dawn. And so we used to have it on Thursdays and it'd be like, right, me and David record some content and then pass it over to the, motion team and they would edit it, get it ready for the next Thursday. We'd post it like consistently. But as of late, it's been more like internal developments, like how to promote, the back end of WordPress. But allocating, we still do it on one day, but it's not necessarily on a Thursday. So if I get something to the design team, they'll discuss it in their workflow chat or the design team meeting and just treat us like any other client. And we should really be a little more organized with our own stuff in terms of a project management system. But at the moment, we just have like a Google Sheet with everything that we want to do for Dawn. And there's literally like 100 rows. And they vary completely, like from completely transforming like our YouTube thumbnails. Like I want to do that, but we need strategy behind it. And that's taken ages to get to that one. And then there's things like part of the sales process. As I say, like that, we've got something which we call the PPP document at the moment, which is like the pitch process and proposal all in one, like this really nice document, a really nice way of like telling the client what they're going to get. And that's, taken a long time. And I think it's just a case of, as I say, treating yourself like a client and having regular meetings to make sure that things get done. So we have like a monthly session where we go through everything on that list, near enough, and just reprioritize, restructure. And then if something pops up, like that website component video, we saw something and we were like, we need this. And it took 10 days to turn it around, which is pretty fast, I think, for something completely brand new. And yeah, it's just trying to be as organized as possible, treat yourself like a client. Um, and yeah, it just works like any other client. They give things to me and I give amends, and just trying to be as clienty as I can.
Yeah, I suppose you have to have a sort of, even though you're part of the same team, you sort of have to have a bit of, I don't know if disconnect is the right word, but a bit of a sort of authoritative sort of nature, because you need to sort of demand things are done, aren't you? Obviously, client work is priority from a business and a financial perspective. But what I've really liked about what I've seen from what you guys have done is, there's a consistency. So when you had when you released your website, I think it was probably about a couple of years ago, wasn't it? Was that with all the new headshots, etc. The brand seemed to be really sort of taken to another level. But what I really liked was a lot of what you were talking about was stuff that I always found was quite guarded in agencies. They didn't really open up about their sort of maybe their processes and stuff. And I must admit, I do see the industry in a completely different way since starting writing on. It's just, it's completely changed my perspective. And I think a lot more people do that these days, because that goes back to that transparency mentality that we were talking about earlier. But is that something that you're really keen to sort of celebrate and champion, is the those things that make what you do unique, even though we all follow similar sorts of themes and processes, don't we? But there are certain tweaks that agencies employ that make them stand out. And instead of just hiding that away and it being a private thing, it seems to be really quite public for you guys.
Yeah, so our mission, I don't like, because we're a branding agency, we know our like values inside out. We know our mission, we know our vision, we know like everything. We really practice what we preach. So our mission is to rid the world of bad design and poor communication. And if by sharing something, it's helping rid the world of bad design or poor communication, then we're doing what we set out to do, even if that means that an agency copies us. Like, we just don't care. Like, because I think community over competition is something that I really stand for. And we don't gatekeep, and like, we'll put prices out there. Like in some of our insight articles, there's like prices of how much we charge for stuff. And, you know, yeah, it's just very transparent, because I think in this industry, like somebody called up yesterday, like, how much is this? How much is a 60-second animated video? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, it depends exactly what you need. But I think having a bit of transparency, being like, so for 60-second, video, it would probably start at, minimum 3 grand. So, and then you might be looking, if you've already got some brand assets, it might be 3 to 6. And then they're like, oh, okay, great. But I think it's something that the phrase "it depends" is used too much in our industry. Like, it does depend, but a 60-second animated video isn't 40 grand, is it? Like, there is as much as we want our clients to like say their budget, because they'll be like, oh, it depends, like we don't really know. They do know, but it's just a from and to. And I think if we can do things and kind of give as much detail as we can, then that's where the good stuff happens. And yeah, especially with things like the podcast and the webinars, like, we go through exactly how we work and exactly what we do. And there was a really good podcast episode actually that I listened to of the vice president of HubSpot on Everyone Hates Marketers. It was years ago, so you might be able to dig around. But she basically said, yes, you can give away your stuff, and yes, people might copy you, but they'll probably copy you anyway. And there's companies that will probably do the same thing that you do anyway. So what's the point in gatekeeping? Just, if you're sharing it with the world, yes, your competitors will hear it, but your prospects will also hear it, and your clients will hear it, and it'll be out there for everybody to sort of what you do, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think there's some sort of flattery in being copied, isn't there? There's, most things are in some sort of form, aren't they? In some shape, we've all taken
Yeah.
inspiration from little things or tweak this, that, and the other. I think that sort of idea of trying to sort of guard things too much seems a little bit old-fashioned these days. I can sort of understand it when it's, in certain circumstances, but we're not sort of talking about rocket science here, are we? Or, fixing the global politics or anything. It's just a service that we offer, and I think if you saw somebody replicating it, that just obviously means that it's good, and it's somebody's impressed by it enough to want to be able to do it, but they'll never be able to do it in the same sort of way because it comes from the people that imagine it in the first place, isn't it? Um, just before we end, just thinking more about not the again going back to this idea that people might be tuning in from a creative perspective, looking at how they could potentially sort of raise awareness of themselves because it is really really difficult, especially in that sort of smaller sized agency market. There's a lot of noise, isn't there? I think about things like that you guys do quite proactive in the community. Obviously taking part in this, and the team did the process driven, like you say, insight piece probably a couple of years ago now, which is incredible. But do you guys involved in other things externally from what you do yourself, just to sort of raise awareness? And it could be as simple as attending events or speaking at other opportunities to sort of just share that message a bit more.
Yeah, so we try as much as we can. Like we I try and push Dave as like a sort of public figurehead in the industry. But it's actually harder than you would think to get, him on panels and boards and stuff. And he is on a panel in a few weeks' time with Joe from the marketing meetup. So yeah, he does. So he's done one recently at the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, and he's also been a part of like helping shape the curriculum for one of the local like colleges and unis. So yeah, he does want to share like as much as he can with the world, and since he's sort of stepped away from actually doing the do and into more of the MD role, his goal is to sort of spread the message on like this is why design and creativity is so important. So he's in lots of different places, and then we've got some of the team that are constantly at like events and stuff, like the ladies wine and design, like the girls go to. Um, and from my side, I go to like all the marketing meetups and all of the marketing events. And I think more than anything, it's just getting like your personality out there, because a lot of like the buy-in doesn't necessarily come from what you do, but it comes from showing that you've got the knowledge to somebody else, um, and sort of being easy to do business with, and a nice person to work with. So yeah, I think those kind of events and boards and panels are really important, not just for sharing your knowledge, but getting people to know you as a person.
Yeah, because I think that's become really apparent to me is that it's another one of those sort of simple phrases of people buying from people mentality, because a lot of designers do are all capable of pretty much creating great solutions and solid work, but it's why do they pick you every why does the client pick that one out instead of A or B? And I think by being visible and elevating your own voice and, like you said, personality and individuality, all those sorts of things, and just being in the room. You don't have to be a networker, so to speak. And things like I think my issue is stuff like just the word marketing and networking. They're quite cold, aren't they? They come with a bit of a they're quite sterile, and they come with us. They're associated with things, whether they're right or wrong. They're just that sort of you throw enough shit in it, some of it sticks sort of mentality. So you sort of have to sort of break that down and show that there's a face behind it, and not everybody is going to be like a sort of a serious hardcore seller of stuff. Most of us just want to have a nice time, be friendly, empathy for others, and just sort of have a sort of peaceful, relatively successful life, whatever success looks like in your own eyes. So by being in and around other people that are also in that craft, it doesn't mean that you have to be selling yourself all the time. You're just part of a community and sort of showing that you're willing to support the wider the wider colleagues or peers or whatever it might be. And then a lot of that slowly sort of starts to, you know, is beneficial in the long term because people remember you, don't they? They'll remember if you're decent more than the piece of work that you've shown them 3 years ago. And I think just by being part of it and being visible, it goes a long way.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. Well, that seems like a very positive way to end. And that's virtually an hour perfect. I know I must apologise to Amy, to everybody that's watching. I didn't really give them much information before we started this. And when I say didn't give them much, it was pretty much zero. So I appreciate you being able to help us get through that in a sort of very, like I say, at the start of this session or these series is made to be very informal and open ended. So it's nice just to not necessarily sort of come up with a right or a wrong. It's just to have that ongoing dialogue, which I think is really supportive. If anybody wants to find you, Amy, that's on the chat. Where's the best place to see you online?
Probably LinkedIn, to be honest. Just type in Amy Gleave. And yeah, I'm always on there. So just drop me a message.
Amazing. Well, that's great. That's a great way to end it. Great way to start the weekend. I appreciate your time, and I thank you everybody for tuning in. Next month we've got Grant Mitchell, who's also based just outside of Manchester. He's the owner of Future, and we'll be talking about creative education. He's a lecturer, he did part-time lecturer as well as an agency owner. Tickets for that are on Eventbrite too. And then the week after that, we've got Paul Andrew, and we're talking about where do ideas come from. So that's very open-ended, just sort of discussing, you know, how things can pop up at any sort of time, and we should always sort of keep that in your mind. So if anybody wants to tune into that, please feel free to pick up a ticket, and we'll be adding new speakers to this series as we go through the year. So until next time, Emmy, I'm sure we'll catch up soon. Have a great rest of the day and weekend, and
Thank
I'll
you,
see you
Chris.
later. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.